Dark Roast Caffeine Case Files respectfully acknowledges that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We honor the Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people who have been stolen or silenced, and we commit to telling their stories with truth and respect. Welcome back, Caffeine Case Filers. Or, if you're new here, welcome to Dark Roast Caffeine Case Files. I'm your host, Kate. As Canadians know, June is Indigenous History Month, a time to honor the original stewards of this land and their rich heritage. But as true crime storytellers, we have a responsibility to acknowledge that this history includes a painful legacy of systemic failure. So, this June, I'm dedicating my episodes to the truth that every Indigenous life is a story worth fighting for. And today, we're going somewhere dark, even by our standards. Just a quick content warning. Before we go any further, this episode contains descriptions of extreme violence, sexual exploitation, and the kind of casual, bone-deep racism that will make your blood run cold. I will not use the slur the newspapers used, but you will hear its echo in every word they wrote. Also, I need to tell you up front, this case does not have a happy ending. No final twist where justice prevails. The only justice here is the justice of remembering. So pour your coffee, take a seat, and settle in. A man walks into a police station. He says, "I killed her." He gives the time, the place, the weapon. He confesses to butchering a teenage girl in a saloon upstairs room. Open and shut, right? Not in 1889 Calgary. Not when the victim is Indigenous. Not when her name is Rosalie Newgrass. That first jury looked at the confession, looked at the blood, looked at the body, and said, "Not guilty." Then they tried him again, and this time they convicted him. But by then, the message had already been sent across the prairies, across the decades, all the way to the Highway of Tears, in the Winnipeg landfills, and every missing Indigenous woman whose case file gathers dust. The message was this: some lives are cheap, some deaths don't matter. This is the murder that started it all, and you have never heard it like this before. To understand Rosalie Newgrass, you have to forget everything you think you know about the Wild West. The Cree, the Niyawak, had lived on the northern plains for centuries. They followed the bison, traded with the Blackfoot to the west, and the Assiniboine to the east. They were not a primitive, lawless people. They had clans, they had ceremonies, they had laws, and women had real power. Cree women owned the lodges. They chose the camp locations. In some bands, they had a direct voice in council. This was not a perfect society. No society is. But it was theirs, and it worked. Then came the bison slaughter. Between 1871 and 1879, the great herds collapsed. American and Canadian hide hunters, the railroad, and settlers who understand that to kill the bison was to starve the Plains nations. They all did their work. Millions of animals gone. The Cree faced famine. Then came disease, smallpox, tuberculosis, measles, sweeping through bands like fire through dry grass. Then came Treaty 7, September 1877, on the Bow River, the future site of Calgary. The Blackfoot, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda signed. The Cree were not even invited, but the treaty carved up their hunting grounds anyway. By 1885, the Northwest resistance had been crushed. Louis Riel was hanged. Cree leaders like Big Bear and Poundmaker were imprisoned. And a teenage girl named Rosalie Newgrass found herself adrift. We don't know exactly when or where she was born. Early 1870s, probably. Somewhere in Cree territory. We don't know her parents' names. We don't know if she had siblings. We don't know what she looked like. But we know she ended up in Calgary. And in Calgary, in 1889, an Indigenous girl with no status, no family nearby, no money, she had exactly one way to survive: the sex trade. Calgary in 1889 was a boomtown. The railroad arrived in 1883, and the place exploded. 4,000 people. Mostly men, surveyors, speculators, blacksmiths, gamblers, drifters. 4 men for every woman. The Northwest Mounted Police were there, but they were stretched thin. A handful of redcoats covering thousands of square miles. Their priority was the whiskey trade, not moral regulation. So, the sex trade flourished, openly, quietly. Everyone knew about it. No one talked about it. The women working these rooms above the saloons were almost always Indigenous, displaced from reserves, cut off from their families, starving. They had no other options. Some historians estimate that by the late 1880s, half of the Indigenous women in towns like Calgary, Edmonton, and Fort Macleod were engaged in survival sex work. Not because they wanted to, because the alternative was watching their children starve or freezing to death on the prairie in the winter. Rosalie Newgrass was one of those women. She was not yet 20 years old. The Turf Club Saloon on Scarth Street was her workplace. A 2-story wooden building, unremarkable by frontier standards. Downstairs, whiskey, gambling, men arguing about horses. Upstairs, rented rooms. And on the night of February 28, 1889, one of those rooms became a tomb. But before we go inside, before we follow the blood, we need to meet the man who killed her. His name was William Fisk, but everyone called him Jumbo. Jumbo Fisk was a blacksmith. Big man, strong hands. The kind of guy who could bend iron and drink most men under the table. He was known to the Mounties, not as a murderer, not yet, but as a man with a temper. A man who had been in fights. A man who drank too much and swung too hard. In frontier towns, the description fits half the male population. But Jumbo Fisk had something else inside him. Something that would reveal itself on a cold February night. We don't know exactly why he went to the turf club that night. Maybe he was looking for whiskey. Maybe he was looking for a woman. Maybe it was just a Thursday and the saloon was warm and Rosalie happened to be there. But here's what we do know. At some point, Fisk and Rosalie went upstairs together. And then, something snapped. The newspapers later compared the scene to Jack the Ripper. That's how savage it was. The Vancouver Daily World reported that Rosalie had been murdered in Jack the Ripper fashion. Beaten, cut, mutilated. Not killed quickly, not killed cleanly, destroyed. And then Jumbo Fisk walked out of that room, walked out of the turf club, and walked straight into the mounted police barracks. He confessed. But here's the thing about 1889 Canadian law. It didn't see Rosalie Newgrass as a full person. The Indian Act of 1876 defined Indian as male. If an Indigenous woman married a non-Indigenous man, she lost her status, her band membership, her legal identity. She became a non-person. And even if she didn't marry, even if she was just a Cree teenager trying to survive, the law still saw her as less than human. The word, quote, squaw, end quote, carried the weight of that dehumanization. It meant disposable. This is the legal framework that would determine whether Rosalie's murder was treated as a crime or as a minor inconvenience. And the first jury would show everyone exactly how little her life was worth. Let's reconstruct the evening. The records are fragmentary. The newspapers were careful. They didn't print the kind of graphic details we would today. But between the lines, a picture emerges. Thursday, February 28th, 1889. The turf club is busy. Men drinking, gambling, smoking. The air is thick with tobacco and whiskey and sweat. Rosalie is there. Maybe she's working. Maybe she's just trying to stay warm. We don't know. Jumbo Fisk arrives. He's been drinking. Maybe he knows Rosalie. Maybe he doesn't. They go upstairs together. What happened in that room? We'll never know for certain, but the aftermath tells us everything. Rosalie was beaten, her face, her body. The kind of beating that doesn't stop until the person stops moving. She was cut multiple times. The wounds were deep, deliberate, cruel. This was not a fight. This was not a crime of passion. This was annihilation. When Fisk finally stopped, there was nothing left to destroy. He walked out. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He walked to the police station and said, quote, "I killed her," end quote. The next morning, someone went into that room and found Rosalie's body. The Calgary Tribune called it, quote, a shocking and brutal murder that exceeded anything in the memory of the oldest settlers. Remember, this was a frontier town. These were men who had seen violence. They had seen bar fights, stabbings, shootings, and they were still shocked. That's how bad it was. And yet, and here is the part that still makes me furious, there were people in Calgary who shrugged, who said, quote, she was only a squaw, end quote. Only a squaw. Those three words are the key to everything that follows. In the days after the murder, a bizarre rumor swept through Calgary. Someone claimed that Rosalie's body had been stolen from the undertaker's premises. Stolen for medical dissection, a common fear in the 19th century, when medical schools paid good money for fresh cadavers. The rumor was false. The body was never stolen. But the fact that the rumor spread tells us something important. People were scared, not because the killer was loose, he was already in jail, but because the murder had been so savage, so intimate, so wrong, that the town didn't know what to do with the feeling. So they invented a new fear: body snatchers, grave robbers. Something they could name. But here's what they didn't do. They didn't mourn Rosalie. They didn't ask who she was, where she came from, what her dreams might have been. They didn't bury her with dignity. She was buried in an unmarked grave, probably a pauper's grave. No headstone, no name. The town moved on. But William Fisk stayed in jail, awaiting trial. The newspapers of the day are a masterclass in dehumanization. The Vancouver Daily World called her, quote, the squaw Natalie, end quote. Got her name wrong, but made sure to get the slur right. The Calgary newspapers called her, quote, a woman known as Rosalie, end quote. As if she had no last name, no family, no history. One paper wrote that, quote, there are many in Calgary who feel Rosalie was only a squaw and that her death did not matter. They printed that as a fact, as if it were reasonable. This is the narrative that colonial Canada built. The, quote, squaw, end quote. Drunken, promiscuous, lazy, dishonest, less than human. It was the flip side of the Indian princess trope. Both were lies. Both served the same purpose: to justify violence. Because if she's not really human, then killing her isn't really murder. That's what the first jury was about to prove. The trial opened in April 1889. The courtroom was packed, not because of public outrage over Rosalie's death, but because Jumbo Fisk was a local character, and the details were sensational. The Crown's case was as solid as they come. Fisk had confessed. Witnesses placed him at the scene. The forensic evidence, such as it was in 1889, pointed unmistakably to him, open and shut. The jury was all white, all male, all settlers. They deliberated not long. Verdict: not guilty. I need you to sit with that for a moment. A man confessed to murder. He told the police, quote, "I did it," end quote. And a jury of his peers said, "No, you didn't." They didn't believe the confession, or they didn't care. Or they believed that what happened in that room wasn't really murder, because the victim was, quote, "only a squaw," end quote. History repeats itself. In 2015, Raymond Cormier was tried for the murder of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine, an Indigenous girl whose body was pulled from the Red River. The jury acquitted him. In 2018, Gerald Stanley was tried for the shooting and death of Colton Bushey, a 22-year-old Cree man. The jury acquitted him. All white juries, overwhelming evidence, and the same verdict: not guilty. The pattern began here. With Rosalie Newgrass, with William Fisk, with the first time a Canadian jury decided that an Indigenous life didn't count. But here's where the story twists. The judge, whose name is lost in history, declared a mistrial. We don't know exactly why. Maybe he saw that the jury had been instructed incorrectly. Maybe there was a procedural error. Maybe even he, a white male judge in 1889 Calgary, was uncomfortable with what had just happened. Whatever the reason, William Fisk was not released. He was held for a second trial. And that second trial would produce a very different outcome. The second trial happened later in 1889. The same evidence, the same confession, the same witnesses. But this time, something was different. Maybe the jury was different. Maybe the judge's instructions were clearer. Maybe the public mood had shifted just enough. The second jury deliberated. They came back with a verdict: guilty. William Jumbo Fisk was convicted of murdering Rosalie Newgrass. The sentence: 14 years hard labor. Not life, not the death penalty, but 14 years of breaking rocks, swinging a sledgehammer, sleeping in a cell. From the Crown's perspective, justice had been served. But had it? Rosalie was still dead. Her family, if she had family, had never been notified. Her body lay in an unmarked grave. In the legal system that eventually convicted her killer, had done so only after one jury had already said her life didn't matter. What happened to William Fisk after prison? The record is silent. He probably returned to blacksmithing somewhere else, died in obscurity. What happened to Rosalie Newgrass? She stayed dead, unmourned, unremembered, for 134 years, until now. Some people hear this story and say, but he was convicted in the end, so justice worked. No, justice didn't work. Justice eventually limped across the finish line, dragging one leg while an entire town shrugged and said, quote, "She was only a squaw," end quote. The damage was already done. The message had already been sent. Indigenous women are not fully human. Their deaths are not fully crimes. That message echoed down the decades. It echoed on the Highway of Tears, where dozens of women have gone missing since the 1970s. And the RCMP did next to nothing for years. It echoed in Winnipeg, where Jeremy Skibicki murdered 4 Indigenous women in 2022 and threw their bodies in dumpsters. It echoes every time an Indigenous family reports a missing daughter and police say, she probably just ran away. This is a legacy of the Turf Club. This is what Rosalie Newgrass's murder set in motion. The Turf Club is gone, demolished. Parking lot now, office tower, whatever. Most Calgarians walk past the site every day without knowing what happened there. There is no plaque, no marker, no public acknowledgement that a Cree teenager was beaten and mutilated to death on that spot. And that is, in some ways, the point. The MMIWG National Inquiry's final report, released in 2019, found that the violence against Indigenous women in Canada constitutes a genocide. Not because every murder was part of a coordinated conspiracy, but because the cumulative effect of Canadian laws, policies, and social attitudes has been to systemically devalue Indigenous women's lives. The report traced the origins of this genocide to the colonial era, but it did not mention Rosalie Newgrass. Maybe the commissioners didn't know about her. Maybe they knew but couldn't include everyone. But she was there at the beginning, bleeding out in a room above a saloon, while the men downstairs drank and gambled and did not ask questions. So why tell this story now? Why dig up a murder from 1889? Because nothing has changed. Not really. In 2023, the RCMP reported that Indigenous women and girls make up 16% of all female homicide victims in Canada, despite being only 4% of the female population. In Saskatchewan, Indigenous women account for more than half of all female homicide victims. The numbers are not improving. The families are still grieving. The police are still underfunding the investigations. The media is still underreporting the cases. And every time a jury acquits a white man for killing an Indigenous person, as happened with Gerald Stanley in 2018, the ghost of that first jury in 1889 whispers, quote, "She was only a squaw," end quote. The words change, the slur is less acceptable in public, but the attitude, the bone-deep belief that some lives are worth less than others, that has never gone away. Rosalie Newgrass is the proof. She is the original. The first in a long, long line of women whose names we will never know. But we know hers now, and we're going to say it over and over until it sticks. We will never know much about Rosalie Newgrass. We don't know the exact date of her birth. We don't know her parents' names. We don't know if she was funny or shy or fierce. We don't know what dreams she carried into that room above the Turf Club. All we know is that she was young. All we know is that she was Cree. All we know is that she was murdered, and her killer confessed, and the first jury acquitted him anyway. But here is what else we know. Rosalie Newgrass matters. Her life mattered. Her death mattered. And the fact that she has been forgotten for more than a century is not a reflection of her unimportance. It is a reflection of a society that has learned to look away. We are here today to look back, to say her name, to give her back some of the dignity that was stripped from her in life and in death. Rosalie Newgrass, a daughter, a sister, a teenager trying to survive. She deserves to be remembered. If this episode has moved you, if Rosalie's story has made you angry or sad or determined, here is what you can do. First, learn more. Read the MMIWG National Inquiry's final report. It's online, it's free, and every Canadian should read it. Read the testimonies of families who have lost daughters, mothers, sisters. Second, support Indigenous-led organizations. The Native Women's Association of Canada, the Moose Hide Campaign, the NWAC's MMIWG department. They know what needs to be done. They need your support. Third, talk about this episode. Share Rosalie's story. Ask yourself, what would need to change in our laws, our policing, our courts, our attitudes? For Rosalie's murder to have ended differently. For her killer to have been convicted the first time. For her name to be known. The answers to those questions are the beginning of justice. If you or someone you know has been affected by violence against Indigenous women, the Hope for Wellness helpline is available 24/7 at 1-855-242-3310. It offers immediate crisis intervention for Indigenous peoples across Canada. This episode is dedicated to the memory of Rosalie Newgrass and to all the Indigenous women and girls whose lives have been cut short by violence. We see you. We remember you. We will not forget. Thank you for listening, case filers. Pour one out for Rosalie. Please take care of yourself after listening to this episode. Do something grounding. Call a friend. Pet a dog. Sit in the sunlight. The darkness in these stories is real, but so is the light in the world. Don't forget to find it. Next week will be a second episode for Indigenous History Month. Please stay tuned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Dark Roast Caffeine Case Files. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Substack, and your favorite podcast streaming service. Stay tuned for more coffee and more crime. I know.